Good afternoon, everybody. We're about 6 minutes past 12 on Tuesday, March 19th. We're going to get started on our ad hoc EMS committee meeting. So I now call it to order. We're going to have overviews and follow-ups from our last ad hoc committee meeting from February 20th. Just to bring everyone up to speed, the latest draft Fitch report was only recently finished and tweaked and was submitted early today. We have Fitch here to highlight any of those changes that were made to that report update. And preliminary cost allocation slides, I believe, are also part of our discussion today, and those are available if there should be some relevant questions to that. To offer proper context, those cost allocations came from a discussion that we had with our member cities who wanted to get a little more fidelity and detail in as far as what impacts these proposed EMS options could have. So to summarize, we're going to have that preliminary EMS option cost allocation. There was also an evaluation of the Office of the Medical Director. And it's also my understanding that outside of this meeting, we also have some pending legal matters that we need to discuss revolving around the ILA. Again, part of those previous discussions that we had with the members of the ad hoc committee, including member cities. So we're going to get some clarity on that outside of the meeting. Let's see, what else? And I think one of the corrections, I think that were made or changes to that report, Val, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a cost allocation table that was on page 8, and I think that needed to be moved over later in the document around the page 40 range, correct?
And Fitch was able to make that correction this morning, so the draft report that is at everyone's places reflects that update.
Good, yeah, it's just a more logical place for it. So without further ado, I turn over to Hillary. Let's get it started.
Yes.
Thanks, Hillary.
So our apologies that the report and presentation got to you so late, but the good news is that there is not a lot that you haven't seen before in the report. There are two sections that Fitch will talk about briefly with you all today. One of them was the one Carlos referenced, and then there was also their compilation of information related to the Office of Medical Direction. And so we will talk about those kind of briefly, but we just wanted to make sure that you knew that the report in and of itself is the culmination of all of the meetings that we've been having over the past few months. And it is written draft. It was supposed to be stamped draft, so apologize for the handwriting. But we're still engaging with the stakeholders. And so what we want to do is have this opportunity for you all to ask your final questions, tell us what is missing, what you think you need to have a better understanding of ahead of our April meetings. But we will continue our outreach to the member cities. We actually had a member city meeting this morning, the hospital directors and other stakeholder groups, the 440, so that we can make sure that we have heard all the perspectives ahead of your next meeting when a decision would be anticipated in April. The other thing is that the lab has now had a chance to look at the information that Fitch has provided, and if you have any more specific questions about that, they raised some questions about capital and some other things that they're still working on. So this report being stamped draft, there could be some changes to it, but the context of it or content of it should remain pretty much the same with some adjusted numbers or references. So again, we didn't expect you to have read this, but I was going to turn it over to Fitch and let them take us through the high level, kind of what's contained and then the new pieces that are in it, and then we can open for discussion about anything you think is lacking, missing, needed. So Steve and Thomas are here today. Don't laugh.
Welcome, Steve. Welcome, Thomas.
Good morning. Thank you. So yes, that was a great lead-in. Thank you, Hillary. This is going to be pretty high level. We'll keep it 30,000 feet for you. When we talk about the report, as Hillary has suggested, it by design should be somewhat anticlimactic because you've seen nearly everything that's contained in the report through all of our briefings to date. So the section, the page numbers may have moved by one, so but somewhere around 33 to 40, might be 32 to 39, is new information where we did some high-level evaluations of the clinical experience, OMD, some other things like that, but not not overly influencing anything to do with any model or alternatives that we've put on the table for that. So just a little bit about the journey of how we got from point A to point B with you. We started the project in late November, got a good kickoff then when we came before you at one of the first meetings. We've really walked through all the engagement. We tried to be extremely transparent with all the stakeholders. The chair has also led a steering committee that we've worked with that includes MedStar and the stakeholders, and they've, up till now, they haven't seen the report yet, but all of the presentations that have come before you have all gone through the steering committee, and everybody's had an opportunity to weigh in and be transparent and participate. So that's pretty important. So we did conduct stakeholder interviews, identified efficiencies in the service model, obtained detailed impression of the delivery, conduct analyses of the current resource utilization that we've talked about. We looked at the risk, historical response data, reviewed system finances, and developed alternatives. So at this point, we've met the scope of work of what we were requested to do, and really from here, after this briefing, I think most of our efforts will be to answer questions and help with implementation and whatever the ultimate policy choice is. So from the first page, we really tried to hone in on what the key takeaways were. So there's really 8 key takeaways that we want to draw your attention to in the report. And again, all of these you've already seen in different presentations for the most part. I'll identify the ones that are new. The EMS system, again, was under-deployed from our assessment, if you recall that from the previous presentations that we've had. And again, we weren't critical of MedStar's administration on that. We know that it was fiscal constraints that drove a large part of that. But again, when it comes back to response times, expectations for service delivery, things like that, there were some challenges that through our efficiencies and recommendations we've addressed. The workload was significantly high. That was a core piece of what we talked about in our report and kind of built the models all the way through. We thank you for the guidance from the committee at those key milestones. You were able to say, yes, go in this direction, continue down this path, et cetera, which helped us get to where we needed to get to. And then we did recommend that the governance of the system reside with the City of Fort Worth as the EMS authority, and we talked about that in the governance section. I think that was the second interim briefing that we provided. And we identified that if the system was resourced appropriately to control for the workload, then there's an opportunity to improve response time in the system by approximately 5.5 minutes from what the 2023 performance was based on the reprioritization. So again, controlling for workload, which should have a positive effect on both the clinical experience as well as the workers, recruitment, retention, attrition rates, things like that, also will benefit in having an improved response time for the system. That's pretty significant. The reprioritization efforts.
Steve, I'm sorry, can
Yes,
you move your mic just a little bit closer to you?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And then the reprioritization efforts we talked about in one of our briefings as well. We think there's an opportunity to better align that for a better distribution between advanced life support and basic life support incidents, so that there are some efficiencies in the system, lower cost point, things like that, to send the right resource to the right kind of call. So there's some positive movement on that. And we also recommended that the interfacility transfers were segmented out and partitioned from the 911 work. The budget, both the conversations from our key stakeholders from the hospital group as well as the financial analyses really aligned well to suggest that it's good timing to go ahead and separate those services and allow the free market to address the interfacility work and the hospital transfers. And then number 7 there, the consolidation of the Fort Worth 911 Communication Center and MedStar Communications. We know that the city is already moving in that direction, but we wanted to really confirm that there's tremendous value in that. Just as a reminder from our previous work, it might have even been the first update. but there's anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes improvement available to the system by consolidating and finding some efficiencies and reducing the number of times that you transfer callers back and forth in the system as it is today. So just to put some context around that, in order to improve the system by 4 minutes would be multiple millions of dollars if you tried to purchase that service in ambulances, right? So there's a great return on investment by focusing on the dispatch side of the equation and moving that pendulum forward, because from the citizens' experience, all they know is that from the time that they called 911 until they arrive, that's the time and frame that the citizenry is looking at the system. So it doesn't really matter which part of the time frame that you segment and improve, the citizens' experience will improve nonetheless. So it's best to focus on areas that have a greatest return on investment. And then the last one, this is new in that language, in that 33 to 40. We did dedicate a little time to talk about, and I won't get in the weeds here, but at a real high level, there's opportunities for the system to function more like a system, right? There's, through stakeholder interviews, our observations, et cetera, there are some things that are just best practices that haven't been wrestled to the ground yet. Things like interoperability between units, functioning, reducing the perception of competition between, special events and who provides what, et cetera. So there's an opportunity, and I think the recommendation that we have for the governance will go a long way to streamlining a single point of clarity of how the system will function. We put some language in there to talk about those kinds of things.
Well, let's pause right there for a moment. And are there any questions right now from the ad hoc committee members?
I do. Carla.
Go ahead, Mayor.
What was your, and I know it's on your key takeaways, but I'm curious about, and I haven't read it yet, so I will, what you've got in here about the Office of the Medical Director and the criticality of maintaining an independent model. And I know there's been a lot of conversations, especially on hospital systems and physicians around Fort Worth.
Yeah, the recommendation hasn't changed from that. That we believe that it should be an independent Office of the Medical Director. Under the governance model that we recommended, that would be a contractual relationship right to the city, is the way we designed that. So in all of the models and every discussion that we've had, one of the key tenets of the entire scope of work was to make sure that we maintained and or improve the clinical experience. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then on number 7, pertaining to consolidation on communications, if you take that takeaway and apply it to all of your scenarios that we're looking at moving forward, is it factored in from a fiscal perspective, making the assumption we would make those changes in communication center regardless of which direction we decide to go?
Yes, at a high level, I'm going to say yes. The way we address that is, if you recall from our last time when we talked about the financials, we pulled out approximately $8 million and set that aside for all of the scenarios except for Model 1. And the largest portion of that $8 million was associated with the dispatch center that's currently at MedStar. So the thought is, we don't have an exact figure because we don't know what it's going to look like when you get there. But you certainly, just from our experience, should expect somewhere around a 30% reduction through efficiencies of consolidating those two.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, go ahead and proceed, gentlemen.
Okay. So as the chair identified from our member city managers meeting the last round, when we met with them, and that was the third meeting that we had with them, there was a desire to see what a cost allocation might look like. And because no policy decision has been made yet, we just created a hypothetical cost allocation for each of the 4 models that we proposed. So you can see here, this is a cost allocation for Model 1, which most closely represents or maintains the current provider. And there's 2 different strategies that we put on the table. The first one, if you look at the population and incident distribution, how we did that is we took 50% of a weighted value for the population in each member city, versus the whole, and then 50% of the value on a weighted average for the incidents that occurred in those territories, and then applied that against the whole. And then this is only addressing the residual funding. So if you think about all the costs that are in the system and all the available revenues, we're only distributing on the cost allocation whatever that residual is. So it's the net cost after all expenses and all revenues. So that's what the population incident distribution is. And then the final column there that says residual public funding times the unit hour cost, we applied a unit hour cost for the actual time on task that ambulances function in each member city. And you can see that they're not really distant apart. They're fairly well aligned. But one of the advantages of the unit hour cost that we believe is that the member cities were clear that they had some concerns that costs would flow down to the member cities through just overall growth that the city of Fort Worth or a couple of your other communities that are growing rapidly would occur. So anchoring the costs on the unit hour cost will insulate those escalations pretty well, because it's really just the actual time on task of ambulances in each community. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's model one. Model two, and we really looked at this from the fire department civilian model that we put on there. And you can see the first one, if I go back there, model one was about $3.2 million. Model two is $10.5 million. And again, that's the upper limit, because that $8 million, whatever efficiencies you're able to glean out of that $8 million, a communication center project, et cetera, you shouldn't exceed that. You should find some fiscal benefits. And then option three was the city of Fort Worth as a third service model, where you would create your own EMS agency and not have it associated with the fire department. And you can see how those are. The costs are a little higher because it had a more robust administrative capacity, because it would be a new standalone agency as opposed to integrating with something that's already existing. And then the last one is the purchase hour model, where you would have contractual services with ambulance providers. And this is about $9.4 million cost allocated across different communities. Any questions on that?
We all good?
Okay.
Okay, continue.
So from here, again, continued engagement with the stakeholders and member cities, the hospital stakeholders. We continue to be as transparent and forthright as we can be. EMS ad hoc committee meeting coming up on the 16th and the 30th. And then there's ordinance and interlocal considerations that I believe you all will have after this, and then alternative service model evaluation. So at this point, again, all the information is now before you. We can answer any questions and fine tune those to any degree that you need. But at this point, I think we've produced enough to at least allow you to navigate your policy discussion. That's it.
Would help if I have the mic on. Thank you, Steve. Thomas, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. I think Steve probably covered it pretty well.
No, I think Steve did a great job in covering it. The only thing that I was going to add a little bit of additional clarity to, the specific sections that Hillary mentioned that were updated in the report. I know you haven't had a chance to read it due to the late timing that you received it. Spoke specifically to quality assurance, quality improvement processes, continuing medical education, clinical sophistication, medical device integration. They're all clinical related or clinical provider related sections, bits and pieces that were kind of the remaining elements that we had to include in that draft that you have in front of you. So those are the key sections that you hadn't necessarily received a great deal of detail about, but you should have all of that detail now.
Good. Well, I think the committee members will avail themselves of some, time outside this meeting to go ahead and read that executive summary of the comprehensive study. Hillary, do you want to add anything here to tie things together before we move on to next steps?
Yeah, I think now is the time for us to pause. You know, we've been very close to this in the process. but you all have your constituents and the people that you interact with. And so is there something or anything that is missing in what we have provided all along the way? I'm asking you to like go back in time a little way now. But is there anything, is there a stakeholder group? Is there a consideration? Is there a concern? I think now is the time that some of those could be addressed ahead of issuing a final report. We want to make sure that we give everybody the chance, including other stakeholders, to weigh in so that there's not something missing at the time you all are asked to make a recommendation and a decision ultimately. We're going to discuss more specifically some of the implications of the ILA and those sorts of things after this meeting in executive session. And so that discussion will occur there, but at this point, what is outstanding? What is missing from what you've received that you feel like you need to make an effective decision?
Anybody? All right, good. Well, that means I think we're doing a decent job in being able to address, what you have. Val?
And I guess the only thing, Hillary, I would add is making sure as we're continuing to work with Fitch and the Fort Worth lab, making sure we understand the details on the cost allocations. I didn't know if you had any context you wanted to add to that.
I mean, so much of this is going to come down to the direction that you all ultimately give. They have not necessarily put together, they've put loose kind of frameworks together of how implementation would work for each of these strategies, but really it's going to come down to understanding specifically what you all desire so that we can build out those models. But the lab believes that the foundation of what we've been discussing is real and accurate enough for you all to use in your decision making. However, they're going to stay engaged and then really look at the actuals that we anticipate so that you can have that as part of your decision moving forward as you narrow down what direction you wish to go. We're also staying in close contact with, I mentioned a member city meeting this morning. Obviously, now that there are numbers, things are becoming more real. And so they have varying concerns. And so really trying to pull all of those together. We're having individual meetings with all of those who want to participate. Some, I feel like, have been satisfied with the group meetings, which we've had multiples of. But that's really important to make sure that none of them are overlooked or blindsided by anything that is going to transpire. We also will be meeting with the executives at the hospitals again. We met with them a couple weeks ago, and then we will meet with them again in a couple weeks, I think, or a week. I'm looking at Val because I don't have the
March
calendar in front of me.
26th.
Yes.
March 26th.
Because the inter-facility transports piece of this is really important. So we wanted them to have time to vet whatever solution they think would be best for their system, so that there weren't moves made that were counter to what they needed as far as timing. So, other stakeholders or conversations or more detail on any of those conversations that you all feel like you need or want?
One thing that I think I would ask you to mention, Hillary, when it comes to, facilities and the $50 million. Remember we had spoken about that? Please explain.
Yes, so give me a second. My train of thought had not caught that. Start it for me.
All right. We had discussed before, and I think, CMO office has mentioned that there is a component of $15 million for facilities that we were talking about and how we see that coming together with what we're doing here in Next Steps.
Right. So the, oh my gosh.
Okay.
I have just,
Want me to take a swing at it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know where it went. I'm always,
So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the conversation was about, with respect to exercising the ILA, what was available as far as the facilities. So in that discussion, we allocated the $15 million a year that's currently allocated for depreciation of those facilities in all of our budget scenarios. But we don't know a market value, and we didn't project if you had to purchase facilities outright, what that cost would be. Is that fair?
thank you.
That's accurate, yes.
Okay.
So that's something, again, that I think in conjunction with Fort Worth Lab, we're going to be looking at.
Thank you. I hesitate to give you an answer, Hillary, on what I personally need. I know the other council members, I think once we digest this, maybe there'll be some other things to iterate off of. But stemming from your comment or question, Carlos, related to capital planning and facilities, I see a scenario that's necessary, and the rest of the body can talk about this over the next week or so, to sit down specifically with the budget office, with Fort Worth Lab, and probably also property management, to understand what capital planning really would look like under a lot of these different scenarios, because that's going to be quite complex. I think it's hard for me to digest just in a few pages, and to make sure the numbers that we're looking at are reflective of what the cost truly will be on the capital side.
We'll do that, Mayor, thank you. All right, any other thoughts? Because now I think we'll find ourselves on, any future requests for information, future agenda items the ad hoc committee would like to explore further. Macy?
I have a comment. I think it's a little bit of a criticism, and I know we got this last minute, but I don't feel like I even know what to say at this meeting because I didn't have the information, so I can't ask for anything, or I'm a little frustrated. Sorry, Carlos.
No apologies necessary. And again, we had worked to have all this out, but we literally found out about it this morning, that there needed to be another, change, to that. What we did see, however, on the whole is unchanged, right? These were just, some minor tweaks, some additional information when it came to the cost allocations that the member cities, had wanted, from us. But again, we should provide this as timely as possible. So we'll continue to work, hard to do that. So apologies to the ad hoc committee.
And
Can we have an opportunity to request information after this meeting?
that's
course
what,
you can.
yes.
Yes,
And so I was gonna say
absolutely.
those should be directed, I would assume toward Val, yeah. And we'll be sure to get it back to you. Because I figure as you digest, you're probably gonna have some clarifications or need for that, so absolutely.
This may muddy the water, but one thing that comes to mind, y'all have done a great job of meeting with a lot of stakeholder groups, but the decision makers have not been a part of those meetings. And so I think that for the body, when we get to that point, especially for the rest of the council that has not participated in the ad hoc, it might be helpful if a representative from member cities came to present on behalf of member cities. EPAB included in that, emergency physicians, your CEOs of your hospitals. I'm not telling you that they're all going to agree exactly, but at a high level, on behalf of their organization or who they represent, could come and speak to us directly on how they feel about the process. I think MedStar could do the same. I think 440 in the fire department, before we proceed with making decisions, so that I would like to know that hearing directly from those stakeholder groups that, no offense, but what y'all are telling me is true. That how they feel like they've been presented in all of these discussions would be helpful.
That's a great suggestion. And we're not ready with member cities yet. We've only gotten started with the one-on-ones.
Okay.
Right? Because it was clear to us that, even though the group meeting setting was fruitful to an extent, we weren't having those really detailed conversations we needed to have from them. So to your point, Mayor, we'll do that. We can get started on the other, representatives from those groups. And then that way, when we finish up our one-on-ones with the member cities, we can roll those in.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Macy, for your words. I appreciate those. What I would find helpful in upcoming meetings is a presentation on how we unravel within the bounds of the interlocal agreement and everything else, that the moving parts. If the recommendation is that there's a governance change and we know it's coming, while we figure out what that ultimately looks like, having an idea of timelines and just the enormity of it will help us wrap our brains around it here, and then hopefully help those member cities as well. And I think they should be part of that conversation. What does that look like if we unwind that particular document?
Okay.
Absolutely agree. And at the beginning, and I'll expound on that, after this meeting, there will be other discussions, from the legal side pertaining to the ILA. We need to have those not just amongst ourselves, but with the council at large. So that's going to happen, because we still have things that need to be answered in terms of that document. Yes, Jared.
I don't know if it's in here in this current iteration, but I think two things that come to mind from a patient perspective is the quality and cost of care, particularly I know we talked last meeting about there's ways that we can augment the future model, whichever model we choose, to get closer to that 5-minute mark. And then secondly, what does the cost look like for the patient for that level of care as well? And so I'm just mindful with the models that we choose that residents will ultimately expect high quality, and also, it's a tight time economically for many families across the city. So I think it's important that we have a discussion about what that cost looks like. It can be in this format or it can be in the implementation phase, but I think those are two things that I think I would want to hear from y'all's expertise, because y'all have done it, all across the country.
Absolutely, thank you.
If you can get that information, to the ad hoc committee, to Councilmember Williams' point, so that we can have that in front of us.
Yep.
All right. Anything else that we need to capture? Okay. Well, for future agenda items and upcoming meetings, we have set aside April 16th at 9 a.m. and April 30th at 9 a.m. as ad hoc committee meetings, is my understanding. Now, what's not listed here again are those ongoing member cities meetings that we're having, on a one-on-one basis, because those, we just started one this morning. Those will be coming up depending on their city manager, fire chief, and their whatever representatives they want at these meetings. It varies, but we need to round them all up per their schedules and then have those one-on-ones. So that's not listed here. Those will continue. Is there anything else, Valerie, that we need to cover?
I don't think so, unless I didn't know, Fitch team, I know as we worked on this final report, if you had any context for the timing, because we did apologize in getting it late to this team to review, but if you had any context or background on that, it would be helpful to share.
Sure, yeah, thank you. And yes, it is hot off the press, and we recognize that. Sorry about that. But the report, just from a timeline standpoint, the first half of the report was your first interim briefing. So you had half of it already with your previous one. And then again, other than those new sections about OMD, clinical performance, all that, everything else has been anchored through the PowerPoints that we've presented to you in each of the 4 ad hoc meetings that we've had an opportunity to come before you. So from here, again, from our perspective, it's the draft. I would expect that it would go through the steering committee and get that level of transparency and feedback like we've done with everything else in this project. And then as soon as we get the feedback from the ad hoc committee, everybody's had a chance to digest it, we talk with the steering committee, then we'll make whatever adjustments are appropriate and finalize it.
And Mayor Parker, you'll be interested in knowing this. In our one-on-ones with the member cities, that invitation's open to mayors too. Mayor Westward Village was present at our, meeting this morning. Charlie, did you have something? I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, for those one-on-ones, what do those look like, and who all is there from, this body, from fire, from MedStar, from everywhere else? And then those member cities, who's representing them at those meetings as well?
Right.
And let me start, because
Go
the
ahead.
meeting today was not an official member city meeting. When we held our last member city forum, there were a couple of member cities who had said they hadn't had a chance to talk with Fitch directly. And Westworth Village was one of those cities. So that meeting this morning was really for them to have a chance to talk to the Fitch team about the reports that had been provided to the EMS ad hoc committee to date. We're working on scheduling the member city meetings, and we want to get those scheduled hopefully starting next week, and then those first 2 weeks of April ahead of the 16th. We'll be setting down, as we get availability from the member cities, working with Mark McDaniel and Councilmember Flores, and we can share the information with this body as well as we get those scheduled. Because we haven't started having those meetings yet, but we get the impression that they want to bring their fire chiefs and their mayors and city managers to that meeting. But those meetings, we're in the process of scheduling, and we can keep you updated on that timing and include you in those meetings as well.
Okay.
We extended the invitation to all, not just the 4 that did not have their one-on-ones, just, to give them the full opportunity to approach us and be able to have, good, open conversations.
Gotcha. Okay, because I'm just thinking for those, that like I'm neighbored with, for example, just either following up with them afterwards, after the meeting, find out if they had their questions answered, or
Yeah.
just kind of talk offline, or they're at the meeting. So just wondering. Thanks.
And then we can also set up one-on-ones with the EMS ad hoc committee members to get your feedback on this draft report to ensure that we've encompassed everything. And we can do that within the next week or so to make sure we have your feedback.
Okay. Any further business? All right, well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate the input from Fitch and the participation of the ad hoc committee members. Meeting adjourned.